Hey, good afternoon, buenas tardes, for all of you that is at home. So today we are alive again here at Jeffo campus to talk to Mr. Derek Detzler. How are you? Good afternoon.
Hey, good, Elizabeth. How are you today?
I'm very fine. It's spring is coming, beautiful day. So of course, look my smile. I'm very happy.
It takes a while in Canada for sure.
Yes, now it's good. So today we are here to talk about your experience, Derek, with productions of broilers with found use of antibiotics, and I'd like I'd like to ask you to tell a little bit about your history when you start to produce without antibiotics, and what drive you for these directions.
Good question. So I guess my family's been poultry farming for 3 generations now, and in the early 2000s, we didn't make a direct entry into discovering antibiotic-free production. We were raising conventional chicken and found that we had some issues with our anticoccidials, and we were developing resistance. At the time, there was a vaccine company, a coccidiosis vaccine company, that said that if we use their cocci vaccine, that we could reestablish sensitivity in our poultry houses to the anticoccidials. It was risky, and we didn't know many people back in 2003 or 2004 that were doing this. So it took some thought, it took some planning, and we decided to go because at the end of the day, we wanted to be sustainable. Like I said, I'm a 3rd generation poultry farmer. I hope my son is 4th generation. To be sustainable, we need these important anticoccidials and antibiotics to work for us in the future. So we invested pretty heavily in learning how to use that cocci vaccine first. That was in 2004, and it took probably a year to year and a half, or 6 to 9 cycles to really learn how to use that cocci vaccine properly. And from there, we saw performance start to improve and recognized that we were kind of halfway to antibiotic-free production as defined in Canada. And then we started to look at ways, well, maybe we could look at removing that AGP, or necrotic prevention antimicrobial, that we were using, because again, same thing, the same theory should apply, in that we had used those 2 or 3 products for 20, 30 years, and we felt that we were developing resistance to those products as well. So if we could find ways to rest the use of those products, that would be a win-win. So 2006, I guess it was our first toe in the water, we would say, to antibiotic-free production, meaning using a cocci vaccine to control coccidiosis, and a more natural type product to control Clostridium. Didn't go well early on, as you can imagine. I have a story. Antibiotic-free productions, when you first start out, it's kind of like swimming with crocodiles. You can jump in once and you might get away with it. And you can jump in twice and maybe, but eventually those crocodiles are going to catch you and you're going to get hurt. And it's exactly what we found. First flock, we thought, oh, this antibiotic-free production is really easy. Second flock, we saw an erosion of performance. Third flock, we saw necrotic enteritis and all kinds of problems. And then it was really hard to reverse the trend. But with time, effort, benchmarking, we were able to reverse the trend. So by 2008, we were all on antibiotic-free, again, as defined by Canada, for our market. So I guess that's been, wow, like 12 years full on now in our production system.
It's interesting because, you know, as I learned from you that you go for these directions, maybe try to solve a problems that you have, right? The first is like, I have coccidiosis problems and I need to switch, and then start to think about. Because sometimes today when you talk about antibiotic-free productions, people are always listening to us and they are interested, and I think this is the future, really. But I also want to talk to all these good colleagues that are follow-up from home, because most of them, like I know, I come from Latin America, in many countries still use growth promoters as a way to control productions. So it's important also to mention that was the first step in productions, like when people start to use the growth promoters, antibiotics, it was a way that we can really grow in terms of systematic productions and high productions that we have today. But with the time we are learning. And from you also, I saw that you said that you have 8 flocks that you just are learning the process. So it's a long process, and you lost for sure a lot of economic input during this period. So do you think that in these days, if you start today with all the knowledge, smart people like you that already did a lot of things, do you think that still we need to lost so many times, or there is already a lot of information, or that you can just go fast and have less lost inadapted to this new system?
Right. So as far as learning goes, I'm still learning after 16 years of starting this process of how to improve my performance. So I don't think you'll ever stop learning. That's a fact for me. Knowing what I know now, and the steps we took, and the management to put in place, and the formula to put in place. I think we can do it a lot quicker. I think a lot of people around the world are transitioning over 3 flocks now. Again, and it depends exactly how your strategy is, or what your strategy is in antibiotic-free production. If it's allowing a chemical anticoccidial, that transition will be much easier than using a cocci vaccine, let's say. So depending on what strategy you take, your management or nutrition package might be just a little different, but no question, time you'll learn, and every production system is just a little bit different too, right? Feed ingredients are different, so there's different challenges come with each different production system. But there's no doubt in my mind that for someone who has the right tools, who has the right control, over the course of 3-4 flocks, they can make that transition.
And what basically during the process, what is the factors that we really need to be careful when you start? Like if you start today, I will change my production and I go for the ABF free. What is the first step that I need to take to start?
I don't think there's a first step. I think there's 2 steps that have to come in conjunction with each other. Mm-hmm. I think there's nutrition, and I think there's management that have to be addressed 100% that first time. It's really interesting. You find out really how good of a manager you really are when you start to pull some of these tools like antibiotics away from our ration. We thought we were great producers. We were getting average, above average results, and we thought we were treating the bird well. When we pulled the antibiotics out and birds started to get sick, or their growth would slow and our feed conversion would increase, we recognized that there were things that we weren't doing properly from either a nutrition perspective or a management perspective. And again, part of that process for us was benchmarking everything we did. Daily weights, water consumption, and nutrition. We would look at everything that would happen daily, and generally we were able to correlate a stall in growth or birds not feeling well with something we had done either through nutrition or management.
So management and nutrition is a key when you think about that. And as you're saying, maybe sometimes we are so worried about to take out the antibiotics because the antibiotics are hiding some of homework that we forgot or we are not doing well. This is basically what you said.
I learned to do things from a management process. I learned to do things in a much better way that was better for the birds. So if somebody told me tomorrow I had to use antibiotics and put them back in my ration, there's not much I would change from my management process, because I believe we're doing things in a much better way for that bird.
Yes, when I was professor in 2005, they start to talk about Europe will take out antibiotics. One thing that I used to say to my students is that this is very good for us, because when you take out the antibiotics, you are changing a product, antibiotic, for knowledge, right? So then you need more professional, more people that really knows what is doing. And one aspect that I want to ask you, because here in Canada, like you are producers, you are yourself taking care of the animals, but most of the countries, when they stay like for situations like US, Brazil, we are integrators. So we work in a chain, and normally who take care of the birds is not people that really are high in terms of education to understand the process. Do you think that the person that take care of the bird, it's important in this process, the education process of the people that be in charge of this should be part of the implementation of a new system?
Yeah, short answer is yes. Why? Because they're critical in the success or failure of antibiotic-free production. We involved our farm managers early on, and they really didn't like me because I involved them, because I was causing them a little bit more work, documenting a little bit more, having to actually weigh birds before we had in-barn scales. We had them go in and weigh birds daily and track it and benchmark as much as they could. It wasn't until we started to see the bird perform much better that we actually got their buy-in, and they were excited about doing what we were doing. But yeah, they're critically important. And if I can just go back, in the Canadian system, we're supply managed. So the grower is separate from the feed mill, is separate from the processing plant, is generally separate from the hatchery. I'll say it's a unique system, but it works well for us. I've always been just a little bit envious of around the world having that integrated approach, because I receive birds at day 0 or day 1 from the hatchery. If I didn't own the hatchery or I didn't have a stake in the hatchery, I really can't control how well those vaccinations are done. I really can't control how well those birds are hatched or what eggs I get. Same thing with the feed mill. I don't have any control or any say in what feed I get. Generally, it's a standard ration that they provide me. I may have some input on what I want, but how will I ever know? In an integrated system, to bring the team in, to bring the live production manager, the nutritionist, and the vet, and bring all three together to design a system, and everybody follows the same plan. I've always been envious of that, because I think the transition could happen much sooner, and I think you'd find less hiccups. There are still times when something goes wrong, and from a farm perspective, I have no idea what it was, and not likely anybody would tell me it was a bad load of feed, or it was a bad vaccination, or it was just bad management, because that happens too. In an integrated system, it's just easier as long as there's that knowledge sharing and information sharing.
So do you think the integration process, all the points of the chain should work together, like improve the quality of the hatchery, the quality of the chickens, the vaccination process, the management and the farm, and going on? And tell me about the nutrition. What do you really change when you think about the nutrition changes that you did when we start, or in these days when you are producing without antibiotics?
So me, it would be a little bit unique again because we chose the cocci vaccine route, and as we went antibiotic free, at the time in Canada, chemical anticoccidials were not allowed in antibiotic free production, so we had to stay on that cocci vaccine route. I challenged the nutritionists. We know we have a cocci cycle, generally 3 of them in our barns. We know we have an infection at a certain time because we did a good job at measuring oocyst excretion. We knew when our birds were cycling. And I challenged the nutritionists. We have a known infection at a certain time. How do you formulate differently for that? And initially, not blaming them, they'd never been asked a question, right? And well, we can add a little bit of natural product or phytogenic to try and help, or there just really wasn't a lot of information at the time to be able to change nutrition in the face of a coccidiosis infection. Now we know that there are certain things we can do in the diet that'll help the bird or help alleviate the stress that it's going through during that period of time. So not always does our timing on feeds fit with cocci cycling. And from the beginning, Elizabeth, they told me never, ever change a feed or change from starter to grower or from grower to finisher in the midst of a challenge. And that's exactly what we were doing. So we had to change the feed to adjust the challenge that was happening in the barn, which paid dividends in the end.
So as I understand, what you are saying is that the coccidiosis is very important. It's the base. You need to control the coccidiosis. Is all the word coccidiosis, it's there. It's in the barn. You cannot take out of the barn totally. So understand the cycle of coccidiosis when you choose, for example, use a vaccine or use a coccidiostat when this is allowed. It's very important for you to adjust the program of diet.
And before that, identify when you're cocci cycling. And you can do that through many ways, through lesion scoring or counting OPGs, but identify when your cocci is cycling, identify that it's cycling properly, that it's cycling evenly. So it's not just we're in a production system that disease has always been fairly well controlled by antibiotics, such as coccidiosis or Clostridium. We're always looking for the easy answer, the feed additive that gives us everything. There's just not one answer. It's a lot of little things that we do nutritionally. Timing would be one of them, for sure. Digestibility of the feed during a certain phase would be another. Certain ingredients, mycotoxin. These are the things we have to consider in successful, consistent antibiotic-free production.
So you need to be aware of the quality of ingredients in the feed meal, because of the integration process helps, because you can talk each other. And let's talk a little bit in the practical way. For example, in your situation, we understand coccidiosis is there, and they cycle, and we want that this happens because in some way we need to have an immune response as soon as possible, like to have an immune response against it to control. So in the practical way, you were saying about let's avoid to change the diet or to have another issue when you have the peak of the coccidiosis. So in the practical way, how this happens in this cycle of productions that you have in terms of days and...
So initially when we first started using it, we would see our first shed in the house or in the barn somewhere between day 5 and 10. And then about day 14, we would see our second shed. And then from about day 24 to 32, we would see our third. Again, remember, we're in Canadian barns where we remove the litter, we start clean. We don't wash and disinfect except one time per year. But we start fairly clean after every flock. It'll be different in countries that raise their birds on reused litter. So for us, when we first started doing it, we saw those cycles and that timing. we were able to manipulate the cycling a little bit through management, in that we can have our peak oocyst production now, our last cycle, somewhere between 14 and 18 days. And we changed our nutrition program, that meaning timing of delivery, to fit what our cycle is. It's amazing when you dive into cocci vaccines. I've used them now since 2004. You can manipulate them. You can make them cycle when you want, for the most part. Given the fact that your bird is healthy, the vaccine was viable and sprayed properly at the hatchery, and it was re-ingested early on in the barn. Given all those things correct, you can manipulate your cycle forward, backward, up, down, depending on litter moisture and what you can do with litter moisture. So for us, we like to have our peak cycle somewhere between, I say, day 11 and 18. And we adjust the timing of delivery of our feeds based on that.
And you adjusted the time exactly when in this process for this change?
Yeah, so once we have a management system in place that gives us consistent cycling, so we start our starter feed goes to about day 20, 21, even day 18. We have some flexibility there. And then we switch to grower somewhere 2021 and take it to about 30 days. Generally, we have fooled around with moving up our grower feed and only feeding a load or two of grower and changing over to finisher by day 26. Again, we have immunity to coccidiosis. There's generally no cycling. There's generally no lesions we can find after day 26. So we can get away with feeding a cheaper diet. So it's more opportunity that we look at.
Okay, perfect. And when you talk, we need to really know the cycle of coccidiosis. We need to really put more effort in the cycle of coccidiosis to adjust the diet, to adjust. And talking about products, I received some questions. The people send questions, and I thank you so much for you to be kind, because it is drive your discussions here. So some people ask, when you think about alternatives to antibiotics, like you already said that we cannot trust everything in the changing in the product, because we know that we need to adjust diet, we need to adjust management, and we need to understand the cycle of coccidiosis. But let's talk about alternatives of antibiotics. What's your experience, good or bad, when you start to look for what you can use to help this dysbiosis, natural dysbiosis, let's say, that happens in the cycle of production?
Again, so I would be speaking from my system on a corn soy diet. And generally our disease challenge, viral challenge, is fairly low in Canada compared to other areas around the world. And I'd also say that if somebody could give me $1,000 a ton to spend on additives, I'd probably have them all in, because each additive brings its own value for sure. However, I'm a chicken producer and I pay for my own feed, and you may have heard it before, I'm a little cheap. I don't like to spend a lot of money, so I like to be cost effective. For me, and again, we landed on this back in 2006 to 2008, when we were doing all of the trialing of all of our products. We landed on, interestingly enough, protease enzyme. We knew that when the bird was cycling with coccidiosis, we were getting a lot of feed passage. That meant there was a lot of protein traveling down the intestinal tract, undigested protein, which was the perfect environment for Clostridium to bloom. If we could make that protein more digestible up front and lower that crude protein just a little bit, that gave us a benefit. So when I look at, it's funny, when I look at replacements to AGPs, for me, a protease enzyme would be right up there for sure. And there's more and more research being done on that as we speak. As well, again, not one product is the answer to the AGP, because they're fantastic. But the organic acids, the essential oils, we really landed on those. They gave us our best value. And our best value was finding a way to protect those acids and oils to have them effective in the lower part of the intestinal tract.
And let's talk about like I think the big issues when you start is the necrotic enteritis, true? So I think like
yes.
is the nightmare of all the producers when they think about to take out the antibiotics is the necrotic enteritis. So what is the best way to manage that?
So necrotic enteritis, I blame for my gray hair. So I'm prematurely gray. But the best way to manage necrotic enteritis is through cocci control. The best way to manage dysbacteriosis is through nutrition and alternatives. Okay, so necrotic enteritis, we haven't seen a bad break of necrotic enteritis in a long time. Meaning, it's probably been 7 to 8 years since we've had a bad break of necrotic enteritis. We do see, and again, through benchmarking and management, we've developed trigger points. We know when the litter starts to get a little bit wet, when mortality goes up just a little bit, we know we're on the beginning of something happening that's probably not going to end well, and we have to react fast. And what do? Well, there's certain management protocols that we put in place to slow that bird's growth down just a little bit, to try and give it a breather, to slow that cocci cycle down just a little bit, just to give that bird just a little bit of a breather, that it can work its own self through any challenge, through this necrotic challenge. So I'm trying to explain in a nutshell, we slow the bird down when we see something that we don't like. And generally that helps a lot.
Manage the growing, it's very interesting. Lately we have a lot of discussion here about protein in diet, so it's nice that you talk about proteins, because I think almost all the people that have been here in these days doing this webinar, they talk always about the excess of protein and the effect that this has with inflammation process and the Clostridium and necrotic enteritis. So I see that there is a lot of learning in the process. There is a lot of loss in the implementation of this change of system, and a lot of cost, right? So after all these years of your experience, do you think it's worth to do this change? You are able to have the same results, performance results, and economic results that you got before you change for antibiotic-free production?
No. No. Antibiotics, Elizabeth, are wonderful inventions, and we've used them really well to our advantage over the past 30 years in our industry. They work for the most part. The issue is, in my perspective, is that they're starting to work not as well as they once did due to resistance, and the consumer is asking us to take them out. I have flocks that rival conventional production for sure, that are pretty close to feed conversion and growth rate. On the whole, I would say that I lose probably 3 points in feed conversion versus a good working conventional program, meaning the AGP works very effectively and the anticoccidial works very effectively. So I'm losing 3 points in feed conversion. My mortality is probably 0.5% higher, but I would say it was just a shade higher anyways using a cocci vaccine versus a good working chemical or ionophore anticoccidial.
Yes, I have had some experience helping some companies to start changing in Latin America. And I also saw that we have some loss. But at the end of the day, Derek, I'm wondering that with the time, like when you start, you still have not new antibiotics, but still you have some alternatives to change growth promoters all the time. But looking in these days that we are today, there is much long since we have the last growth promoter antibiotic launched in the market. So I'm wondering these days that when you start to have like a lot of resistance and you still increase the dosage, it's not more. In fact, you are not using growth promoter anymore. You say that you are, but in fact, you are using dosage very higher and still don't control everything. I wonder that maybe in that scenario, in these days, we can, when you change it, you can have even not better results, but you can at least stay in the average that you have before you change.
Yeah, I think you're bang on. I think more and more producers are seeing problems, recurring problems in their flocks, and that could be related to an antibiotic that's just ran its course, that there's a lot of resistance built up. The struggle with that I see a lot is when they decide, okay, it's time. We have to pull the antibiotic out and try something different. They'll try something, they'll try a natural type product or a replacement, and they'll see performance crash that first time. Because we have to remember, over years and years and years, we've created that strain, that bacteria, that cocci in our barn. That's become what it is. And antibiotics aren't controlling it as well anymore. When we take the antibiotics out and we put a natural product in, that first flock can be pretty tough. But we need to take time and stick with it and slowly shift that microflora, slowly take that which we created over years and years to shift it back to a more normal type microflora in the house. It just takes time.
Yeah, this is interesting. We had discussions with Professor Billy Argus here some weeks ago, and he bring to us the beautiful Taina, that is the student of him, and she mentioned the litter, and I put more than litter, the feeders, I put together because the environment that the bird is as another live organism that you have to take care. I thought that this is so nice because when you talk about like to think about that, I have the broilers, but I have another organism because the synergism that we have between all these microorganisms in the barn, it's something that play a lot of difference in terms of the results that you get or not, right?
Absolutely, and just as an example of that, in Canada, we're legislated to wash and disinfect our barns 1 time per year. And in my antibiotic-free system, that makes it really hard because I've created something in my barn, a microflora that's really good. And I can tell by performance. If my performance is good, that means I have a good, stable microflora. At times, when I wash and disinfect, I can wipe out that microflora which I've created in the absence of antibiotics and let it be reestablished with something that might not be great. So if I wash and disinfect my barn and by chance I get chicks in that have a bad E. coli infection, a yolk sac infection, or if I get enterococcus and we're shedding that into the environment, it's just not always working out really well. Thinking that washing and disinfecting are a great thing, and they can be, for sure, in my opinion. If any time we have a disease challenge, we wash and disinfect. Hands down, no problem. But when we have good performance, flock after flock after flock, we have good mortality, we have good feed conversion, it appears that we would have a good microflora as well, and I don't want to change that.
So basically, you need to modulate this microbiota because this is play a very important role in the animal performance and health, right? This microbiota that we have there.
Yeah.
This is, I think it's very amazing that we should start to think about how is the barn, how is the litter. In 2 weeks from now, we have a specialist of litter reuse here for. It's Marcos Dalbrac. He works in BRF in Brazil, and he did a lot of work in that, because I really believe that the environment plays an important role in this system when you think about ABF free. And when you think about the future, Derek, I know that from now we start to have some market for this kind of can you talk about the market for it, and how much is the difference in Canada when you have ABF free compared to conventional, and what's the benefits that you have in your vision about globally, because I know that you work in different countries, Asia and Latin America and Europe. So what is your vision about the future and the economic aspect as well of the antibiotics free production?
So this is where I put on my fortune teller hat and try to predict the future. In Canada, up in pre-COVID, the market was pretty stable, and we were somewhere around 12% to 13% of our production was true antibiotic free. The Canadian Chicken Farmers Association has put steps in place to reduce the use of subtherapeutic antibiotics that are important for human medicine. So as I look over the horizon over the next 10 years in Canada alone, I believe that our tools that we have will be less and less. Again, we can argue whether that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. I don't know. I just believe it's going to happen. In the U.S., I'm not sure. The antibiotic free was really driven by a customer or a couple of customers that required it. I don't think it was legislated. So where that goes, I think it'll depend where the customer goes. I believe there's going to be more and more pressure when you talk about One Health, more and more pressure to reduce the use of antibiotics. I never want to see an elimination. I think that's wrong. We have to consider welfare, but we also have to consider the impact on human health, as we know we're having a very, very small impact on, but it is an impact. So I think over time, as the World Health Organization has laid out, that animal agriculture, including poultry, has to reduce or should reduce the use of antibiotics in their production. So how fast that will happen, boy, I don't know. When I look at the U.S., would I have said 5-6 years ago that they'd be where they are today? Absolutely not, but it's happened. Yeah, it's just there's more pressure. It'll take more time, but this COVID thing has kind of just put everything on pause. Well, let's just get food to the store, and that's important right now.
So, but when you think about COVID, in fact, the One Health comes more strong, right? Because if you have the human beings more exposed to a disease, to have antibiotics to control secondary infections is to preserve. I like the word, to preserve a molecule of antibiotics to treat humans and even treat animals when needed. It's very important. It's like I think our professional mission in animal production, right? I think it's so. We are almost running the time here. It's very fast when you talk about things. I wonder, Derek, what is your message for all these people that are listening to you in different parts of the world that want to start with ABF free productions, and what's your advice and message as a producer, as a professional that I know that you are, and as a human being as well?
Yeah, some people may question that last statement, but we won't go there. No, I think the first is to start with a commitment, right? Anybody that starts, and I go back to our first cycle of cocci vaccine. It failed, and it failed terribly. And if we weren't committed to make it work, we would still be doing conventional production today. I'm sure of it. It didn't work. Ask yourself why it didn't work, and ask yourself, can it be better, and can we change things to go in that direction? That doesn't happen overnight. We don't have enough patience. It takes time, and fortunately or unfortunately, it's going to cost us something, either in sweat equity, in feed conversion, in time, but it's probably going to cost us something. We're going to learn so much, and I know more about chicken today because of the transition to antibiotic-free, because I was able to fail and learn why we failed, and learn why our growth rates weren't the same, and measure daily weights and measure OSS. And having that and knowing that is power. So my advice would be is to stick with it as long as you can. Be committed to it. There's lots of people out there in your regions that are better experts than I with your diets that can help. People can help. Yeah, it's a different world. Plus, companies are investigating alternatives now as we are. At some point, it'll get easier. Companies will investigate and find alternatives that work with much more efficacy than they do now. You think for 30, 40 years, we didn't really have to research alternatives because there was no market for anything. Antibiotics work really well for us. So this is relatively new. Antibiotic-free is the last 10, 15 years. I think with time, with new additives and new research, I think things will get easier. It's my hope anyways.
Very good, very good. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us. And next week, we still talk about antibiotic-free productions. We talk about antibiotic-free production in swine with Dr. Jalusa de Embrapa in Brazil. So we talk about what is going on in terms of One Health in swine. And another week, we talk about litter, how to reuse litter with this specialist. So I think it's always nice to listen. Thank you to everybody that is at home. Thank you for listening to us, to stay with us, and next week we come back. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. Take care, everybody.